Hey, everybody, and welcome to the CGSP Roundtable. We were away for a couple of weeks because we were traveling. We're going to tell you about that today, but I'm so excited to be here with two of my great friends. Joining me from Nairobi, Kenya is Njenga Akina. A very good afternoon to you, Njenga.
Good afternoon, Eric and Jero. How are you doing?
Oh, it's great. And you beat me to it. Good afternoon, Jero, our Africa editor, joining us from the beautiful island of Mauritius in
Good
the Indian
afternoon.
Ocean. Good
Good,
afternoon, Jero.
good afternoon, folks here from Mauritius, and I'm happy to be back. We are all back, though. I'm gonna let Eric to the story about our trip, but yeah, we are all back home, and really excited to see you again for another conversation.
Yeah,
Yes,
this
I-
was a
yeah.
long time coming. We were away for 2 weeks. We're sorry that we missed it. We tried to do it when we were in South Africa, but the schedule and the bandwidth and the load shedding all conspired against us. So our apologies for not having a
But we
show
did the
last week.
podcast, though. We did
But
a
we
good
did do the
podcast.
podcast, and for the first time ever, we were in a beautiful studio, which was a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
fun.
true. Yeah,
And
We use
so
it
take
on
a listen
different
to our
events.
podcast.
our
What's that,
Patreon
Jen?
had our Patreon had opportunity to see some of the pictures. So if you're not Patreon member, it's an opportunity for you to join the Patreon community, and you're gonna have some sneak peek of what's happened beyond in South Africa. So yeah, that's really was a good experience for us there.
That
Yeah.
was fantastic. Well, we were at the African Investigative Journalism Conference in Johannesburg. This was a fantastic conference. 347 journalists from across Africa were there. This is the largest investigative journalism conference of its kind anywhere in Africa. I've been going to this for the past 5 years. This was the first time for Giraud and Njenga, and it was really just an amazing experience. Why don't we start with you, Njenga, because you had a really interesting time. You were leading some seminars on climate change. Giraud, you led a number of different seminars, both at the African Investigative Journalism Conference, but also at the Africa-China Journalism Forum, as well as a forum put on about critical minerals and critical mining, put on by China Dialogue and the Africa-China Reporting Project. Njenga, talk to us a little bit about some of your impressions from AIJC and the climate discourse that you had about amplifying African voices in climate coverage in Africa.
For me, what I got was that climate change is now becoming a big deal. Because even for the sessions or for the session that I hosted on Amplifying African Voices, the room was full, there was no sitting space. And afterwards, there were so many questions that were coming. How do we do this? How do we manage to convince our editors and our newsrooms to help us do this? Because there is nothing that is moving on that front in mainstream newsrooms. However, what I realized was that for us in the English African, in the English speaking African regions, we are much better in terms of the available guiding materials, content, learning materials, training materials that are accessible to us. Unfortunately, for the French-speaking African journalists, they do not have as much as we have. And actually, I got many who are from that region, not less than 5, who are saying that we need what you shared and spoke about during the session in French. And so looking at this and understanding that there is such a disparity in terms of where we are, those who are able to understand English and those who cannot speak it, that was a fire under my seat, kind of, to just move this forward by providing these materials to ensure that at least we are moving in the same kind of pace. And also, I got to interact with so many journalists from across the continent, from North, South, and every other region. And all the things that they were saying were that we need to be having this so that we can exchange ideas and see how we can move forward. On climate change, there isn't as much. But looking at the people who attended and saying, we are interested in doing what you're doing from where we are, then that kind of challenges me in amplifying African voices, not just in English, but also in other languages.
Sure. Now, Giraud, you ran a number of different sessions throughout the week that we were there. We did one together on China literacy. Let's start our discussion there on some of what you talked about. I found it to be a little bit discouraging that I've been at this conference now for 5 years, and I've had a chance to interact with any number of journalists. And this China literacy question is one that we've been bringing up a lot more on the show. In our discussion, we found in our room, again, there was quite a few people there. It was almost standing room only. The knowledge about China was very, very low, if almost non-existent. And that was, I think, in my view, rather discouraging. What was your takeaway?
Yes, it was quite sad because I remember I started the presentation with one question. Who's here, who among the journalists is a member of a newsroom that covers China at least once a week or twice a week? There was no hands that was lifted, and it was really interesting. And we really went into that conversation, giving that, I'd say that 101 on China literacy to allow journalists to kind of understand and know what they need to cover about China, the difficulties when it comes to covering China, and really why it matters a lot. And it's sometimes you have that feeling. I had that feeling, especially interacting with different journalists, that there was such pressing need for many newsrooms on the continent to know more about China, to develop that expertise, that in-house expertise about China, and to have a very, very deep knowledge about China and how to cover it. And we really felt it during even the exchange, the topic, the debate, and everything. It was really revealing how much that space where the China knowledge was just like, shrinking over the years. You've been there, you've been the conference.
It's not expanding, it's shrinking.
Exactly. It's not expanding, it's just going on the other direction, when you see less and less people really newsroom on Africa becoming China expert. And we really covered different topics, and we really hope that they're gonna hire much more expertise in the newsroom. And mind you, it's not the lack of human resources. I even gave that number that from 2000 to 2020, we are now at the very least 600,000 African students who went to China, who studied in China, and who has the expertise of China. And of course, among them, you're going to have many of them who don't have the clear expertise, but you have a huge pool of human resources where newsroom can recruit from and find people to allow them to have that deep knowledge about China. And to wrap up on that, the China literacy problem is not only in the newsroom. We also saw that how it's a transversal issue that you see in the politics and the newsroom, and it reflects really bad on Africa when it comes to talking, covering, and negotiating with China. And I think it's something that you really need to learn and to master really well from the African perspective. That's knowledge about China is it's a must right now.
It's really shocking to me how, again, we're 20 years into this, and there's no interest that I've been able to find in African government, think tanks, academia, or journalism to expand China literacy. That is, in universities, I don't see China regional studies coming up. I don't see in newsrooms, as you pointed out, Giraud, the utility and taking advantage of all these African students who've been over to China, 600,000 plus. And again, for a lot of people, they may say, well, China, so far away, what does that have to do with us? Well, this is the largest trading partner for something around 44 African countries. I mean, This is significant. I mean, this, and in Kenya in particular, in Njenga, this is what we've seen over and over again. And I'll give you a little interesting, data point here is that I think about 2 weeks ago, the Kenyan government just repaid its highest ever loan repayment to the Chinese at $471 million in a single payment. The consequences of Chinese engagement are real, okay?
Yeah.
And the fact is that the Kenyans are really case study number one of showing incompetence in many ways in how they deal with China. Now, I'll be fair here, and I want to put a little disclaimer here. We know people inside the Kenyan Foreign Ministry who work on the China desk. And they have said over and over to us saying, Eric, you're too hard on us. You're criticizing us. We are putting the information up to the leaders, and the leaders are ignoring us. And that is really tragic. So even when information is there, it's being ignored by the political elites. And I just, for the life of me, I don't get it. You would think that there would be a few people in journalism and in media and academia who would be more interested in this topic, but they're not.
Yeah, I think the complexities, because for someone like me who's just here for almost a year now, I've had to unlearn a lot, because what I have learned through my experiences over this period is that anyone who looks Asian is Chinese,
Exactly.
or anyone who is light-skinned is Mzungu. Mzungu is a Caucasian in Swahili. And so the misunderstanding that there are different people from the continent of Asia is really interesting. And going beyond what we see as people, even the governments, my government has not done enough, because we engage a lot with the Chinese. It has not done enough to tell us that this is what we are doing and this is how we understand or don't understand them. You realize that for what we are doing now, it will be ignored. And this ignorance goes from, the top all the way to the bottom, because if it's too complex, I don't want to deal with that. There are many other issues that I am dealing with. But you find that there are costs to that. When we do not understand what these relationships are, what the benefits and the risks are, then we cannot question as a citizen. And I think there is an advantage for the people who would thrive on our ignorance, that we keep not knowing so that they can keep benefiting. And so let them stay uninformed. So
Interesting that you mentioned that.
Sorry?
It's interesting that you mentioned that about the accountability part. It's one point that I've even mentioned, the fact that if the media, even the public, doesn't know much about China, we basically are in an impossible position where we can challenge the narrative that the government are bringing us back from China, because you just don't know how much you don't know, so you don't know how much you can question. So basically, they just can go scot-free making allegation about what China is going to do and what China is not going to do, and at the end, after 4 years, you just have nothing, and the Chinese are gonna keep quiet, and we just don't know how to move with that.
Yeah, but I've been talking to a number of other governments, and I've been talking about this very issue. And what's interesting is that they will say, Eric, it's not only the Chinese, but believe it or not, the Americans as well say something similar. And we've heard this from American scholars and American government folks that a lot of people haven't kept up with the changes in the U.S. either, and they think that the U.S. is still the same country as it was 5-10 years ago, the way that they think that China was that way 5-10 years ago. And so I think this is a broader issue that in many African governments are consumed with their own domestic politics and not focusing enough on their international relations. Now, to be fair, we talk a lot about Africa because you guys are from Africa. We focus a lot on Africa. I don't think this is a trend that's unique to Africa in any respect. This is happening in many different places. It just so happens it's the focus of our conversation today. Yeah. But I think if we were talking about Latin America and we did our, the Latin American Investigative Journalism Conference, and it was in Buenos Aires, I think we would be having a very similar conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is not actually meant to actually single out Africans. I think this is a universal problem. But the fact is, though, is I think that the Chinese benefit enormously from the information asymmetry, that they know more about the outside world than the outside world knows about them. And that helps them enormously.
Powerful country will always do benefit from their asymmetry. That's why it's interesting. Sometimes we have the feeling that African politicians and decision makers, they just don't care about that asymmetry of information. They don't realize how much that, because of its position as a global power, China has much more leverage to use to its advantage in that space of asymmetric information. As you say, it's not only about China, it's also the same about France, about the US and everything. But the interesting part about China, somehow you have the feeling that sometimes Chinese try to make it quite easier for many African countries to give them one specific person to talk to about those issues. So when, for example, the Chinese ambassador in Kinshasa says something, you're pretty much sure that what he's saying is reflecting on reflecting on what Beijing thinks about the issue, which sometimes it's not always the case when you talk about with the French ambassador, US ambassador, because when you're gonna travel back to DC, you're gonna be hearing different voices, and you realize that maybe they have a different position on the issue. But yeah, there is that deep need of knowledge about not only China but all superpowers on how they work and how they function and how they interact with each other to allow us to move forward in that space. Otherwise, we're just lost.
Yeah, and at the AIJC event, there was also another, rather surprising turn of events that you and I had when we were up on stage and we were doing, Giraud, a session on artificial intelligence. Now, a lot of the discussion about AI and news that took place at AIJC was focused on how African journalists can use AI to improve their news coverage, what are the tools, how to use ChatGPT and Google Bard and some of the research functionalities, all very interesting and positive things. You and I took a slightly different approach, and we talked about the dangers of artificial intelligence and how increasingly we're seeing huge amounts of misinformation, which is the accidental spreading of fake information or incorrect information, and disinformation, which is the intentional spreading of inaccurate information in pursuit of some objective. And I was talking almost rhetorically in the session saying, well, how many of you would like to live in a society like China where all of the information is controlled, where the government maintains a strict surveillance of it, where there's a great firewall that blocks off and cuts off China from the outside world? I was not expecting, to be honest with you, that a group of relatively young African journalists, mostly from democratic societies, started nodding their heads and going. And then I stopped a little bit. I said, wait, hold on. Remember when I said, like, how many of you would want to live in a Chinese model of internet governance? And most of the hands in the room went up. Giraud, that was a surprise to me. Why do you think there is this sense that the current system of a free and open internet in most African societies just is not working for a lot of people?
I think it's a general sentiment that you see now all over the world when you see different debates happening on the internet right now. And you can feel that when you are coming from a developing country, coming from Africa, where you don't have a strong regulation about internet, a strong ability to control what's happening on the internet, you kind of feel that this open internet is becoming a tool that's kind of come from outside to influence your society. You have no control over your data. You have no control about what's happening to your data, what information is feeding to the country, how it shapes mind, how it shapes the heart and everything. So all of that is becoming more and more perceived as danger by many society, not only politicians, but also normal people feeling that something needs to be done. We see with the debate about social media, with TikToks and everything, and it's even, as I said, it's a general debate that you see also from the US, where you see now the debate where people are even mentioning the ban of TikTok and everything. At the end, you get the feeling that if we want to have a society, our own society, where things works fine and everything works the way we want them to work, you're gonna have to control the flux of information coming in and coming out. Thus, the idea of saying we might need a kind of not totally open internet, but the kind of internet that we do control and we do know where we are going with it. And I think that's the feeling that many were sharing, many young people, even in Africa, are sharing right now.
So, Njenga, this was your first. This was your first AIJC. Tell for folks who weren't there. Again, most of our viewers were not there. What were your big takeaways from it?
So I happened to attend the AI session that you guys had, and I just wanted to give something before I can move to that. The fear that we have is that you cannot today. It's very difficult to tell the fake news from what is authentic. And there was something that was pushed by a very high level guy in government here. He's a member of parliament, and he's very influential. So he pushed a narrative that was fake. It was pushed from FT, Financial Times, but it was all generated using technology. And so it was trying to show what the former president did and what needed to be done and all those things. And so what they had looted and what needed to be done for them to be made accountable. However, going back to my takeaways on that, the AI will be that's the bit. That's the bit, Eric.
Yeah, let me just quickly show the story that you were talking about here. This is the Financial Times. This is a fake story on Financial Times. And by the way, whoever's got their phone on the table, can you take it off because it's buzzing and bothering everybody on the TV show? So Njenga, Jero, one of you has a phone on the table that's buzzing. So here's the story right here that this is a complete fake. Here we go. He did not write any story about Kenya. This is what you're talking about, which is the frustration. This gentleman here is the head of the Kenya Airports Authority, so a government official. Here's what's incredible, though. Okay. This is what's incredible. He's been called out. 500,000 people have seen this story, and it's still up on the internet.
Exactly.
And I think this is the fatigue that we heard in that room, gentlemen, that people are exhausted from this. How is it that a senior Kenyan government official can get away for 24 hours? So this was, yesterday on November 30th. Yeah. So we're December 1st recording this. This was posted on November 30th. 500,000 views. He's been called out by the journalist, to say this is a fake. And he's not taking it down and saying, I'm very sorry that I put that in there. I didn't realize this or whatever, unless he intentionally created it. But this is the reason why people are fed up with what's going on today, and I think, so I'm really glad you brought this up, Njenga.
Yeah. So looking at this and seeing where fake news is leading us, you can tell the exhaustion with not being forced to sieve information. Because for these, I had to read it, and I went and checked on Financial Times. It wasn't there. The account I got it from, I had to go and tell them that this is fake, and even tagged FT. And seeing this is just exhausting for someone like me who would want to consume information, but I don't know if it is authentic or not. So your session on AI in Africa was a big deal. I also left that one with a question because I was wondering, because AI is fed with whatever is already available, how are we going to tell a different African story? Because if you go look on Google for anything on food security in Africa and all, it'll bring, disappointing photos. You don't want to see that. So how are we going to deal with that? That was a question I had. I didn't get to ask because, I was leaving that day.
Well, part of the, and here's, so the large language models, do you guys remember that controversy that came up a while ago? And I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to type this in as we're doing this. Okay. There was this large language model. So that's like a chat generative model like ChatGPT and Google Bard. They were asked to show a Black doctor helping poor white children. Do you remember that?
They couldn't. Yes, I remember. They couldn't find any pictures.
Poor white children. Let me just show you what came up. Okay, so this is the real problem. Okay, the only thing that it came up with was this image here. Let me share this image right there. There we go. That is the only image that it could generate. That AI that it could generate.
AI could generate. Yeah.
That's it. And it couldn't generate a Black doctor helping poor white children because the information just wasn't there. Okay. And so I think that's why we see the inherent biases within the large language models that exist about Africa, about race, about China, in fact. And that's one of the reasons why we started our own large language model ChatGPT search engine. So that's for our subscribers, if you go to Chat CGSP beta here, one of the things that we found was that when we were typing in China Africa stories into ChatGPT and Google Bard, they were coming up with a lot of the typical Western media anti-China perception of it and the framing of it. And again, we're not pro-China or anti-China, but we didn't feel that what they were coming up with was accurate. So we decided, to look at, to create our own China-Kenya debt. So here, this is using this is a ChatGPT model that's going on here. ChatGPT engine, by the way, but it's only drawing on the information in our back-end servers. So all of our podcast transcripts, all of our analysis that you guys write, all of our news that we write, and this presents a much more balanced view of what China is doing in Africa and other parts of the world, because it's based on the experts we interview every day. So the way we look at it is that we are generating about 3,000 to 4,000 words per day of output. That's our daily output in English, just in English. What we do then, each podcast is 10,000 words. We do 2 podcasts a week. So we have about 32,000 words a week of output. Now, the reason why that's important is because it then feeds 32,000 words into our AI engine that gets smarter every single day that we add content to it. And then, so that is 120,000 words a month. And that is about 1.3, 1.4 million words a year. So after 4 or 5 years, we're going to be adding 5, 6, 7 million words to this engine. This thing is going to be super smart. It gets smarter, and the ChatGPT engine gets smarter, but it is closed. It's not going out onto the open internet. And so in Njenga, that's a very long-winded way of saying that where you're going to get your information from in the future is going to depend on whether or not you pay for it. I hate to say it. I hate to say it, but the free stuff is going to be crap.
Definitely, because it's the only way that it can get cleaned up. And so I believe that from the AIJC, my other takeaway was the China-Africa knowledge, which is limited. And now adding climate change, which is a
the climate knowledge was just as limited, by the way.
So can you imagine the confusion that we are telling journalists, hey, China is here and they are doing this and it's a climate change issue. So how do we go about this? So those were my 2 key takeaways, that we need more China-Africa knowledge and infusing it with climate change information and topics. And what we are doing to amplify these African voices, we will have to learn how the Chinese operate. We will have to also understand ourselves and make these information available to the journalists so that they're able to see and make it authentic and not just what they had 10, 15 years ago.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic. And Njenga, you're going to continue to have the stage. Let us, this is a Chinese car that's now for sale in Kenya. This car costs about as much as a MacBook Pro, a very high-end MacBook Pro at about $5,000. $5,000 for a car.
Really?
Okay, and check this out. All at the top there's that on the roof. There is that solar panel.
They really make it
so
simple.
Njenga,
They made it simple, no complex.
Tell us about this $5,000 all gas, not all gas, all electric, solar powered car.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the beauty about this is, you guys, I know you've heard about our complaints on fuel prices. And so the beauty about this car is that you can leave it out in the sun and you don't have to plug it.
Which is great in Kenya because there's a whole heck of a lot of sun in Nairobi.
So it's addressing very key pain points for Kenyan drivers. I drive, and in comparison to what I spend in a week, if I had this, I would build a mansion somewhere with the savings.
Okay, tell us a little bit about who's that Chinese gentleman that you're talking to? Who makes the car? How much is it? How far does it go? How fast does it go? Give us the details.
So this guy is Feng Hui. He came to Kenya in 1997.
Okay.
Interestingly, he'd come for an exhibition. The Chinese company that he was working for was exhibiting textile stuff. And so when he got here, it was his first time. He was like, I don't want to leave. So he went back to China. Then he came back because he had seen the construction had started to pick up. And he was like, I am staying here. And so he started by importing building materials, construction materials. Then his business grew to heavy machinery, vehicle importation. And it has now become an assembly company for cars, for vehicles, cars, and heavy machinery. This is their latest that they are doing. And like you have described, Eric, the solar panel at the top, it's creating some drag. So he told me that they are going to modify it and just have a panel that you can stick on the car, on the roof, without having to put on the rack. And so, having been here in Kenya for those many years, he understands what Kenyans are looking for in terms of mobility. In terms of affordability, this car is, like you said, a top of the range MacBook. And it is true. Okay. For with the inflation now, for 800,000 Kenya shillings, a new car, whereby you don't have to worry about parts and things like that for a number of years, it's such a saving.
I mean, $5,000 is nothing for a car. I mean, it's a lot of money, obviously, for a lot of people in Kenya, but for a car, that's, that's
a
it.
new
I mean,
car.
Joe, what do you think? Do you think that this would have a market in Lubumbashi and in Goma in Kenya? I mean, in Kinshasa.
I do believe it's going to have a certain. It's going to have a certain market, especially since it's a new car. First of all, it's a new breed. So when you say $5,000 in Kinshasa, you're gonna have a second-hand car coming from Dubai, coming from Japan. It's really, but this is a brand new car. The only hiccup's going to be maybe the design, because people like cars because it's also nice. You want to,
this is a little boxy.
You want to flaunt with the car and everything. So, but this one, for me, it has much more the opportunity to create more entrepreneurs in the mobility services, in mobility spaces, where you can really allow people to transport and to drive around.
Let me challenge you a little bit on that question of the fancy style thing. This is the kind of car. So here in Saigon, again, very similar. I think it's less developed than Kenya is. So I even look at the back there in Nairobi. I've never been to Nairobi, Njenga, and I think to myself, wow, that is better than what we've got here in Nairobi, in Saigon. So you're actually quite lucky. But for a lot of people here, their mode of transportation is a motorbike. And in the rainy season, sitting in traffic in the monsoons and the typhoons and the heavy rains is not a lot of fun. Exactly. In fact, for a lot of people, we get flooding, every rainy season that goes up about 1 meter sometimes. And the pollution in the water is so bad because basically the sewage and the street pollution comes up because we're at sea level here. So a lot of people want to move up into a car just to get out of the rain and out of the heat. And so I think, forget about the style. It may look a little janky, but if it gets me out of the rain and out of the heat, and and if you're pregnant or if you're old or if you're a young child, sitting inside, no matter how cheap it is still better than being on the back of a motorbike.
It's way better than a motorbike. It's way better than many things. And when you talk about the heat, the sun, and the rain in the
and
it's just AC. So my friend, this is a go-to thing for the beginner. I really do believe that there's opportunity. It has a very, I think it has a good opportunity to move forward with that project, and let's see how it's gonna go forward. But I'm sure it's going at least to create some entrepreneur in the mobility space in Kenya.
The only limitation though is that it moves. The maximum speed is 55 kph, and so for you to upgrade and get that, he said you would have to change the battery sizes and then other specs in terms of giving it balance and all that and stability. So that's the only hiccup that I found.
But it's not really but Njenga, let me ask you something, because my motorbike that I have here in Saigon also has a 50 kph limit on it. The legal speed limit in Ho Chi Minh City is, it's 40. Okay. But even if it's 60, traffic doesn't move that fast in a lot of these cities because it's so congested.
Exactly.
Okay, so I don't find my 50 kph limit to be that restrictive. Now, a lot of the bikes go faster than mine do, but I don't know. It's doable, and you kind of get used to it,
Definitely. Yes, you would. And the fact that you have luggage space at the front, and then it's
at the front
or 5.
It's got a frunk. It's got a frunk. It's not a trunk. It's a frunk because there's no engine.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
true,
because at the
true.
front, it's space, storage space, well, carrying space. So it has a lot of good features. And like Eric says, unless I am, a rally driver, the 50 kph will do.
But also, what does this say? So in Njenga, this is now, and you had a chance to drive it, right? There we go. We see
Yeah,
you driving
I
it.
did.
So this is now one of the latest in a series of Chinese entrepreneurs who you've showcased for this site. And
Yeah,
again, I don't think a lot of people are aware of
there you
these
go. The
small Chinese
ACSP.
enterprises that are coming over to places like Kenya to build really innovative solutions for
Yeah.
local markets. And I listen, we oftentimes criticize the Chinese for a lot of things, but this is really something that deserves, I think, an enormous amount of praise and attention. Again, maybe it's happening, but I don't see a lot of people from other parts of the world coming to set up, businesses like this in places like Africa.
Yeah, and the beauty about the Chinese, and from Fang's experiences that he shared with me, is that he really didn't mind not fitting in, because all he was thinking about is doing business. And it's about offering solutions, if I may call it that. And so you can see that 30 years down the line, this guy has become a Kenyan. He's a permanent resident, by the way, and he understands Kenya in and out. He also does a business in a way that he acts like an intermediary. So for the Kenyans who cannot go to China, he will connect them. For the Chinese who cannot come to Kenya, he will connect them. And so I think this kind of daring spirit is a very encouraging thing for people like us, in Kenya, for anybody else who would say, I want to go and do something. As long as there is something that I am doing, a solution that I'm offering, this is a template of how to go and do that. Because this guy told me, because I asked him about racism and did he care about it? He told me, well, when I came, because Kung Fu was popular back in the day, there were those things that, the kids will do, but nothing really would shut him out of being in Kenya and doing what he is doing now. So you can see the persistence and the patience has borne fruit for him. And I don't think that he would probably have made a life like he has made in Kenya if he was still in China today.
I love those kinds of stories.
I'm commending the Kenyan government to be able to create that kind of business environment where yes, those kind of investment are possible. And this should be called many African government to really step up the game in creating business environment conducive for foreign investment, because there are many entrepreneurs who would like to come to do that in Africa, but just the space is so much corruption, so much instability that sometimes people just run away.
So, Giraud, you and I oftentimes talk about the big diplomacy in Africa, the US, the Chinese, the French, and all the things that are going on. And I think when we look at what they're all trying to do, to me, none of it's going to work. I don't think the Lobito corridor is going to work. I don't think any of this stuff is going to work. It's too complicated. Okay, but here's the point. This is what the solution looks like.
True.
Okay, this is what it looks like. You get 1 million of Fengs, okay, who are building businesses and bringing innovation and solving problems and creating jobs on the ground. This is what the solution looks like. It's not the big geopolitical contest. So I think you're right. The lesson here is that governments have to follow Kenya's example and create the space for entrepreneurs to set up shop like this. And Njenga, how did it feel to drive it?
Well, I'm used to a different car, so it was a bit jerky at first. But once you get to understand the controls, then it's good to go. So I would say it's a very smooth car, especially without the noise and getting on the road.
Well, that's an EV. Yeah, that's an EV.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's a beautiful, and not having to worry about fuel or running out of it,
Oh, that you got the sun. I mean, it's great. Now, tell us, you were also at an assembly factory here, so we're seeing pictures with this gentleman. They're not manufacturing the vehicles; they're just assembling the vehicles from kits. Tell us a little bit how that works.
So this guy is Isaiah Omuchuma. He's the mechanical engineer overseeing the assembly of these vehicles. The previous photos that just went by are the trucks, because they also do trucks and buses and things like that. not buses, but trucks which are adopted to be buses in Kenya, adapted.
And they're also electric too, right?
No, those ones are diesel.
Diesel,
yes,
okay.
Those, diesel and petrol, basically. But for this, he oversees these. He says that he does this in 2 days with a team of like not more than 4 people, because there will be some welders. Like
he does what in 2 days? He assembles a car in 2 days?
Yes. So the car is assembled to be ready for the road in 2 days. So we didn't manage to get into the assembly line because it's out of, you cannot photograph and do things like that. Fair enough. They have a mold whereby they put the frame and fix, the everything else. Then the painting, they have a kiln where they push the car through and it's painted. And then the welding is done manually. And then after that, there is the testing. So Isaiah was telling me that this takes at most 2 days. And because they don't have to do anything like manually, like drying it out in the sun or something like that, you can have a car ready. You go today and order for it, you have it by Sunday.
Wow.
Amazing. I mean, and then this is, but again, this is what the solution looks like, because Jérôme, here's the thing, jobs. Jobs. That is the only thing that matters. One of the discussions that we had when we were in Johannesburg with a number of different stakeholders from different countries was they were talking about all sorts of different things. And we kept coming back to saying, none of that matters. Jobs is the only thing that matters. In a place like South Africa, where 65% youth unemployment rate, it's all about jobs.
Yeah, you have to show impact. You have to show how you're changing people's life with very small, tiny project like this. Try to imagine you have 10 Kenyan entrepreneurs just launching their business with those cars. It's a business. It's a real business, creating jobs, creating employment, creating wealth as well. Taking people out of poverty. That's impact. And I really do appreciate this gentleman and the approach. Yeah, I think that we should sometime go low, go away from the big geopolitical, go to the what can we do on the human level to really change people's life on every day?
Well, that's a good segue for us. Okay, go ahead, Njenga. Get the last word.
I wanted to say that out of the 50 employees, only 2 are Chinese. So you can see the level of kind of empowerment, I may call it that, of locals. And also, some of these guys are trained in China. So it's a good, beautiful thing to see happening now.
Nice.
Okay, so Jérôme, you said for us to get away from the geopolitics of it all, and we're going to go back into the geopolitics of it, going in to see what happened this week over at the United Nations. Let me just get up that screen, what was going on here. There we go. This was this week at the United Nations, where the Chinese closed out their month-long presidency of the Security Council, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi went all the way to New York to lead a high-level discussion on the situation in the Mideast. We're going to talk about that and also why it really wasn't that inspiring. We're also then going to close out the rest of our show with a quick discussion of Zambia and some of the remarks that we got from last week's show on Israel and the Middle East. So here's the Israeli ambassador. By the way, if you listen to our show from last week, you will know that there was a little interaction between Chinese ambassador to the United Nations, Zhang Jun, and Israel's ambassador here, who, by the way, from what I hear, nobody likes this dude. This Israeli ambassador, everybody kind of says he's a big jerk. Okay, so fair enough. But it was funny, but it was interesting just to see how the Chinese ambassador completely slapped him down and said, you must use respect to our briefers. And the Israeli ambassador was criticizing UN Women, which is an organization, for supposedly kind of allying itself with the Palestinians and Hamas, which, again, we don't know if that happened or not. Exactly. What we saw was the Chinese ambassador interrupting him and saying, not going to do that. I'll be honest with you, in all my years of watching United Nations sessions like this, I haven't really seen anything like it. Oh, let me see. Oh, there's some ad there. I lost my browser. We don't want to see that ad.
Yeah.
YouTube is not fun anymore with all their ads. Okay, so let's get back to, there we go. We'll get back to the, so there's Wang Yi. He did it. Now, here's what's interesting about this is that I wrote afterwards that this was a rather underwhelming experience watching Wang Yi at the United Nations Security Council, because he brought up a 4-point peace plan, which looked almost identical to the same 4-point peace plan that they brought up in 2021. Here you go, right there. And that 4-point peace plan looked almost identical to the one that they brought up in 2014. And again, the point that I was trying to make in my column was that, listen, China, if you want to be taken seriously at the big table with the grown-ups in terms of being a major broker of great power diplomacy, one of the things you're going to have to do is come to the table with fresh ideas. Stale, rehashed ideas are not going to cut it. So not surprising that Wang Yi's, reaction to what he had to say really was no one cared. Everybody just went, okay, here we go again. Same old, same old. They dusted off the same 4-point plan that they've been bringing out here for 8-9 years. Jérôme, this kind of speaks a little bit to some of what we've seen in other parts of the world as well, that the Chinese ability in many respects to adapt to changing world environments is quite impressive, but in other ways, it's so rigid and stiff, and it just has a difficulty kind of adapting to new things and bringing new ideas and expressing itself in a way that people feel excited to be able to follow it. So this was a good example this week, I think, of a failure of Chinese diplomacy.
Yes, I do believe as well. I would have said I wanted to say they show consistency over 8-9 years. They're showing consistency. It was almost word for word. I'm not joking you. I mean, they literally just lifted it. Here's the first, ceasefire and cessation of violence. That was exactly what they said. Humanitarian assistance is an urgent need. Remember, this is 2021, well before the war. And then they said, international support, exactly. And then the fourth is the 2-state solution. So there's been zero change on this. To the defense, they're going to tell you the 2-state solution has been the solution that everyone has been pushing for years. That is correct. So that's correct. We are not moving away from that. This is the basic of any situation. The ceasefire, basically, it's one of those. All of that is standard. You're right. Exactly. All of that is standard. The basic standard. So the question is, how do you make that standard to be much more practical? Because for me, it's just like big principles, big principle, need 2 states, ceasefire and everything. But now, how do you move from there to a very practical implementation of those solutions? And this is where China lacks a lot of experience in that issue. And I do believe that they lack, because I would say they're out of their depth in that situation. It's just I will say they're out of their depth. I'll say it. Because, and here's the reason. There's a little bit of a comeuppance for the Chinese right now, because all year since March, when they brought together the final Iran-Saudi Arabia deal, and let me be super clear, and I know I'm going to trigger the snowflakes yet again, because every time I say this, people start going, wah, 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 wah. The Chinese did 5% of this deal between the Saudis and the Iranians. They were the final broker of it. The hard work on that deal was done by the Omanis, the Iraqis, the Saudis, and the Iranians themselves. It was just the bow on top of the gift that the Chinese did. Now, that's important, don't get me wrong, but the Chinese did not broker this. However, from March going forward all the way to October 6th, and we all know what happened on October 7th in southern Israel, but all the way up until October 6th, the Chinese were saying, we are the second coming of Mideast diplomacy. We can broker any deal. Come on, guys, let's do it. Line up. And so now, all of a sudden, when the poop hits the proverbial fan, China retreats back into we're neutral, and they retreat back to their old talking points, and nothing's new. Meantime, it's the United States that stepped up to do the shuttle diplomacy that opened up the Rafah corridor for humanitarian assistance. Again, the United States is not a neutral broker in all of this. Exactly. They are 100% pro-Israeli in all of this. But they got to get credit for Blinken is doing the shuttle diplomacy in all of the different capitals. China sent its kind of mid-ranking. Jai Jun is the special envoy for the Middle East. He said nothing when he went around to his capitals. Very underwhelming. And again, they're not acting like a superpower.
They're not behaving like the superpower that they want to be seen as.
Exactly.
That-
They're not behaving like that because I think they don't want to get burned in that issue. They're just playing
Yeah.
safe.
They're
They
playing
don't get
safe.
burned. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right. They're playing safe. But
They're playing safe.
these times don't call for playing it
Don't
safe.
call for- Yes,
These
that's a
we are in unprecedented times right now. And the true measures of greatness are really defined in moments like this. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, when you
China, though.
choose the road less traveled, because
Yeah.
I believe that China had an opportunity to say, this is it, this is how we are gonna, by offering leadership, but they failed by reverting back to what was, because they didn't have to wait for the Americans to come and say, hey, let's do this, you know. They would have, because they had already gotten into that paddle, they would have, you know, just swung it and decided, let's do this. So I think it was a golden opportunity that was wasted. And they would have built on, you know, the way they brokered that deal with the Saudis.
But it is.
But the
listen,
problem
this
is
hard to do. Go ahead, Jerome.
But the problem is, like, in this context, China has that posture of like, I don't want to be seen as the bad guy for anybody else. China really wants to keep that reputation of clean hand, to be in the position where it can still criticize other countries' policy toward Israel or Palestine. So in this regard, I kind of like, yeah, they played in a way that we don't want to get involved. The US could have done that, because the US, they're just like, they're just like, guys, we agree that we are pro-Israel. We're going to walk on that path and we're going to move toward to that. But China so far is still walking on eggshells, doesn't want to displease Israel, doesn't want to displease Palestine, even though I do believe that this month past, Israel was really not happy about how China handled the situation. They wanted China to be much more vocal against Hamas. And the incident in the United Nations really just make Israel even more mad, because it was really, China presidency was really quite tough on Israel during those times. So yeah, I don't believe that the end of China ended up being a close friend to Israel, at least perceived as a close friend to Israel.
By the way, if this is a topic that you are interested in, we've done some excellent shows. Reason I'm auto muting. Apologies about that.
Yeah.
If this topic you're interested, we've done some excellent shows with Johnny Essa, who is our Mideast editor. You can go check that out on YouTube. You can see the shows. Speaking of YouTube, so last week we did this excellent show with our Southeast Asia editor, really talking about how China is benefiting enormously from the Israel-Hamas war, because the standing of the West is really starting to just plummet. And we spent an hour on this show. And guys, it's just kind of funny, as a sign of the times of where we are. I mean, we we got dozens of comments on the show. We've deleted, twice as many of these, because there were a lot of nasty comments. So, Eric sounds like a staff at the State Department of the USA.
This is just lazy argument, lazy comments.
No, but here's the reason why. So we literally do a show for an hour on, how the West is being undermined, how U.S. credibility is collapsing in many parts of Africa and Asia and the other, because of its unrivaled, unconditional support of Israel. A whole hour on this. And we talked about the pro-Palestinian perspective coming out of Indonesia. I said one word, and we wanted to compare how in Indonesia there is disproportionate concern for the Palestinians, in part because there's just greater awareness than there is for the Rohingya, which are Muslim refugees from Myanmar, and also the situation in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. And my only comment was, and again, I just needed to acknowledge it because it wasn't the major part of the story, was that there are well-documented human rights issues in Xinjiang. All of these comments, they didn't listen to anything else, and that triggered everybody. They stopped there.
They stopped there.
And I didn't say the word, and they're accusing me of saying that there was genocide in Xinjiang. I never said anything like that. But they hear the words human rights and Xinjiang, and boy, they just go off, and they don't pay attention to any other part of the story. Now, here's what is so kind of dispiriting about this, is because every single country, and Jero, you come from a country with human rights problems. I come from a country with human rights problems. And Njenga, you come from a country with human rights problems. Find me a country in the world that does not have human rights problems, and I will find you a liar. Okay. And so for the fact that we can't have a conversation beyond these very narrow channels, I don't know, Giro. It just is,
It's
seeing
tiring.
these comments is so frustrating. I mean, there were so many bigger issues that we were addressing in this show. This was a show not about the Uyghurs and human rights issues. This was specifically about how the global South, writ large, across the world, is saying enough to the US, enough to Europe, and all the time that people could find to comment on this was about the Uyghurs.
I've just learned not to care about those people, those comment and those people anymore, because do you see the show that we're making right here? We started fine with, we praised Chinese entrepreneur, and we went a bit of a criticism of Chinese diplomacy, but you're going to be surprised how people are just going to stop there and say, you people are against China. Guys, have you seen the show? Have you watched us talking since the beginning? Come on. Okay. Anyway.
I mean, it's just really funny. I mean, it's just really funny. And
ignorant also.
Yeah,
it's just lazy.
And you don't want to have a conversation. We have to be able to have conversations about this. And
Definitely,
when everything is just, screaming and yelling, it just doesn't help anybody. So, okay, we have 3 minutes left before we got to get out of here because we got to make sure this show doesn't go beyond an hour. Giro, we did a show this week with Rachel Savage from Reuters, who's an amazing journalist at Reuters who covers the Zambian debt issue. The Zambian debt pact that was signed back in June, which was back then defined and described as a landmark debt deal, blew up 2 weeks ago. Here we are 2 weeks later, no sign of any progress or negotiations. We're going into the holidays. Meanwhile, the kwacha has cratered. Inflation is up. Interest rates are up. The Eurobond borrowing rates have gone up in the past 2 weeks. The situation in Zambia is bad and getting worse. Just give everybody a little bit of a headline of what the situation in Zambia is in our discussion with Rachel.
Just basically so people kind of know, I'm gonna drive into that in the video I'm gonna make for this week. So basically just Zambia official creditor committees rejected the agreement that Zambia has found with its private bondholder because they see the agreement was unfair to them, so they say they're gonna back away. So because in June, as Eric said, they found an agreement in France, and in October in Marrakesh during the World Bank and IMF summit, they did find an MOU that was going to be signed by different official creditors. A few weeks after that, Zambia started this discussion with private bondholders, and they did find an agreement. That agreement obviously was not was not liked by many in the official creditor committees, where you find China and France and other different countries. So basically, Zambia has been sent back to the drawing board to find a new agreement and to just find a new. Basically, to find a new agreement with everyone now, because now the deal with the official creditor committee is a done deal. And with both private bondholders is also dead. Now the question becomes how Zambia is going to move away and moving forward into that. But to be fair, news from Paris, they say, it's not big of a deal. You don't need to worry. It's just a bit of a hiccup. You're going to find a solution. And Zambia Finance Minister Situmbeko Motsokwani is also trying to reassure people, you don't need to worry. It's not a big of a deal. But since then, it's been almost 2 weeks now. No news, nothing to see, and we are heading on vacation, so we just don't know what's going to happen. I know that we had a conversation on the podcast that you're not sure that Zambia is going to be saved from this, but I do believe that there is something that's going to be done. But before the end of 2023, I'm not sure about that though.
So if this is a topic that you're interested in, on YouTube, we've got our new show, our interview that Giro and I did this week with Rachel Savage. Can't recommend it enough. We basically wanted to do it as a primer, as a basic introduction to what's an incredibly complicated topic. So between that and our Israel-Hamas coverage, I highly recommend you kind of spend some time here on our YouTube channel to go through the various shows. And of course, if you want to see all the great work that we're doing, just one very simple place to go check it out, ChinaGlobalSouth.com. This is where we're doing all the great work that we're doing, every day, and we need your support. This kind of media, we talked about AI. We talked about fake news. We talked about all the content we're doing. And Njenga and Giro both need salaries. I do too. And the only way that happens is with our subscribers and with you. And if you want pretty much, I would say, the most balanced coverage that you're going to find of China in the world, you're going to come to us, and you're not going to agree with everything. Okay. I got to tell everybody, you're not going to agree with everything, but that's not the point. We're not here to be a sounding board for you to reaffirm your already pre-existing views. Giro oftentimes is trying to challenge your worldview to see it from a different point of view. Giro, I was talking to one of our Patreon supporters today, and we spoke for 2 hours, if you can believe it.
Wow.
And it was a tough call. It was, and we went back and forth. We had this really intense conversation. And at the end, we left, of course, very friendly. It was fun, but it was hard. But he was kind of looking at the world from an intensely American perspective. I kept challenging him to look at it from a different point of view. And by the end, we kind of got to somewhere great. But that was the point, is having these kinds of conversations that are not easy, you don't always agree with, but that's what's important. That's what Njenga and Giro and Johnny and Cobus and Antonia are all doing, is putting together ideas into the space that you may not like, you may not agree with. Some you do, some you don't, but they're important to kind of think about. So go to ChinaGlobalSouth.com/subscribe. And very quickly before we go, Giro, tell everybody about what you're doing at Projet Afrique Chine.
Yes, in Projet Afrique Chine, we cover China, Africa in French, where we have our podcast Afrique Chine, where we receive different guests coming from France and coming from the rest of the world as well, where we have those conversations in French with different experts and journalists talking about all those issues. And I do really appreciate that you subscribe to our newsletter. It's for free. On our side, it's for free. You don't need to worry about that. And I published a very interesting story today for this end of the week. Maroc, comment la Chine profite du French sharing américain. We're going to have it translated in English. I think it's going to be available there as well.
We're
working on it.
We're working on it.
Great. You're going to have a look on that. So yeah, we have all these different stories, those great stories that we cover in French. And again, I'm going to say, if you know someone, an expert, a journalist who are willing to have this conversation with us about China in Africa in French, please recommend them to us. We're going to have them on the show. We're going to have those conversations.
Okay, well, let's leave our conversation there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We've got Njenga in Nairobi, we've got Giro in Mauritius, and I'm here in Ho Chi Minh City. We're going to get back to our normal schedule for the CGSP Roundtable. I'm going to be here in Saigon for another couple of weeks, then I'm heading out to California. So we'll be in California. I'll be in California for the holidays. And then, we'll continue to do the show. No matter where we are in the world, we're going to continue to do the show. And so we hope that you will join us. And until then, really, thank you so much for all your support and all your comments and all your engagement. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you next time.
See you.
Thank you so much. See you later.